with the bright fairy lights, and you'd moan at the snow, 'cause your car wouldn't go. Oh, it's cliche to be cynical at
Hello and welcome to this episode 8 of the For All That podcast. And we're all feeling very, very festive here in the green room of the podcast. And today we're being joined by Ian Smart, who is a soi-disant lefty lawyer and Labour hack. Nice to see you, Ian. Thank you for coming on.
Good afternoon, in fact.
Indeed. And how are you doing, Michael?
Not too bad. I'm just looking forward to a wee bit of time off over the period.
Yes, I'm sure it should be quite nice. It's all getting quite frosty and everything's covered in ice. It's quite good here. Okay, well, maybe to begin on a cheerful, festive note from when we're having our mind a rounded figure who wears a red coat, we can go to a rounded figure who wears double-breasted coats, and maybe start off with our first kind of story of the week, which is one coming from you, Ian, which is about maybe the EU, Alex Salmond. I wonder what you wanted to just launch into there. Crack on and we'll see what we make of it.
I kind of maybe want to start by saying that obviously I don't start from a position of kind of natural well-intention towards the First Minister, but on any view, he has been a very, very formidable political figure in Scotland, really essentially since he came back in the run-up to the 2007 Scottish Parliament elections. But I read somewhere some time ago that all politicians have a shelf life of 7 years, and his 7 years are beginning now to loom a bit on the horizon. And I do think he is becoming a problem for the Yes campaign in a number of different ways, but particularly by his kind of, there's a piece in one of the papers today talking about his ability to paint in very, very broad strokes, but people don't really notice that the detail hasn't been filled in, and that has really fallen apart on them quite badly, I think, on the EU referendum question. And at a certain point, Nicola, who keeps coming in and doing the firefighting, the danger for her is that she starts to get tired. She's seen as a much more collegiate figure, I think, both within the SNP and, to be fair, within the Yes campaign, but she starts to get tired a wee bit with the same brush, and you wonder at some point if she might actually just say, well, you shouldn't have said that, and I don't agree with her, rather than trying to nuance how she disagrees without actually saying expressly that she does. So.
Yes, I mean, I suppose it's a well-known line, the magic fades. Though equally, I mean, for some of us in the run-up to the 2011 elections, there were some similar calls, if you remember, that maybe Salmond was losing his touch a bit. And isn't there a bit of a worry about whether he would, in that case, be able to carry the popular vote in terms of the Holyrood elections? And of course he did. I don't know, Michael, I mean, you are kind of pro-independence, but like Ian, you're no natural friend and necessary ally of the First Minister or the SNP in general. I wonder, does that story that Ian was kind of sketching there about a First Minister who's maybe, becoming a little tarnished, the bit rusty, does that really resonate with you?
Oh, there's a number of things here. I think I'd agree with Ian in that he's been shown to be a very, very able politician. But the thing tends to get on my nerves a bit is that I think particularly the Labour Party, sorry to say so, Ian, but along with the Unionist campaign, have just decided, okay, get Salmond, and this is the way that we can get Labour back into power in Holyrood, and it's also the way to stop the Yes campaign, because I think it was mentioned before, but they've identified him as the most able person in the Yes campaign, which I think might actually be a strategic error on their part, but they've identified him as and it's get him at all costs. And yes, he's not showered himself with glory in recent weeks, but for me, as just an independent supporter, all the arguments about Salmond are actually something of an irrelevance to me, because what I want is independence as a beginning, not as an end with Alex Salmond as leader.
Well, what do you think about that, Ian? I mean, because I think I would agree with Michael's analysis there that there is a very clear kind of decapitation strategy, if you like, which from Joanne Lamont and others, which is really grinding in this story about Salmond being a chancer, Salmond being an untrustworthy figure, Salmond who is likely to lie to you and whose prospectus for independence is bogus, and thereby trying to use that as a kind of entree to bash independence. And I worry a wee bit sometimes about this personalisation of the Constitution, as if it was all about all about Salmond, and this is something I think you see quite a lot in the Westminster kind of centric press, that by turns regards Salmond as this oddball and also as this miraculous wizard who delivers triumph after triumph in the face of adversity. I wonder, do you think that's a convincing strategy for Labour in the long term in terms of independence and politically, or do you worry that maybe the personalisation might actually not do the trick?
I think, oddly enough, I mean, I agree with what Michael said, that this has been a long-term strategy for the Labour Party, but to be frank, it has bounced off him over a long period of time. That I mean, if you look at the kind of early stages of the Blair premiership, the Tories had this kind of strategy of attacking Blair all the time, and they just didn't get anywhere with it. And you know, I blogged very critically of the hustings for the Labour leadership. Just slightly more than a year ago, when all three candidates asked, you know, why should you be First Minister? He said to reply, because if I was First Minister, Alex Salmond wouldn't be First Minister, which kind of, you know, worked with a Labour Party audience, but wasn't really any kind of argument at all for anybody else.
Yeah.
But I do think now these attacks are beginning to kind of strike home, and I also think a wee bit that's because there's material to go on now. You know, we all joked at the start a wee bit about his body shape, etc. But that kind of attack just was personal and ridiculous.
Yeah.
But he was caught out very, very badly on the EU thing. And this kind of, you know, assertion, policy making by assertion, is I think becoming a bit of a problem for him. And you know, there is a history in Scotland of people being built up. The most single best example is Ali MacLeod, but you could say to some degree the same with Fred Goodwin, that somebody can go within a very, very short period of time to being the most loved figure in the country to being the most hated figure in the country, and I just think there's just a danger.
I don't imagine you'd ever say that Fred Goodwin was ever one of the most beloved country.
Most, but maybe not most loved, but most admired figures in the country.
Yeah.
You know, you can't really get round that. If you look back at the ABN AMRO takeover, there was no real, you know, people said they were maybe paying too much money or whatever, but generally speaking, the whole of Scottish society RBS was going to be the dominant bank in North-West Europe, and one of the top 3 or 4 banks in the world. And our man Fred, you know, educated at Paisley Grammar School, was going to be right at the top. I think you do him a disservice by saying that he wasn't at one point a very, very admired figure.
No, I think that
spectacularly and correctly. I'm not saying for a minute he wasn't the author of his own misfortune, but it was the way that people. It was the way that people could turn, you know, within a very, very short period of time. That I think there are other examples. I mean, you can argue, even in a more frivolous way, that Billy Connolly had the same experience of going, you know, from being a hugely admired figure to actually, for a time at least, somebody who most of Scotland did not a lot of time for.
Yeah, and that's sort of called the kind of tall poppy syndrome, I think. And does that perhaps suggest a kind of interesting relationship between that old hoary idea of the Scottish cringe, and which is I think a real phenomenon, and is a bad thing in general terms for kind of Scottish culture and society. But it's interesting, I think, with the people who, like Ian's saying there, who let you leap out of the kind of cringing atmosphere, this kind of excessive build-up of confidence and enthusiasm and uncritical confidence and enthusiasm behind particular figures. Whether they be bankers with plans to take over Dutch banks, or politicians or comedians or whatever, that actually there's almost a kind of extremity and excessive quality of that, which maybe speaks to the continuing relevance of this cringe and the desperate holding to people that maybe can drag you out of it. I don't know, Michael, if that rings any bells with you, that kind of idea of the cringe and how it might manifest around excessive enthusiasm and then rejection of some of these public figures.
Well, I don't know if you've ever read the strapline on the top of my website, but I think that would give you my answer to that. It's a quote from Aldous Huxley that I've had there from day one, which says, so long as men worship the Caesars and Napoleons will duly arise and make them miserable. And I've had that there from day one, and that's the way I tend to think about all leaders. But the thing is, when they're attacking one, they tend to be building up another. And let's just come to this from a mad perspective for a second. If you were an alien and you watched Holyrood on television, who would you think Joanne Lamont was? Okay, right, that's that woman that stands up and complains about that guy. And who's Alex Salmond? Well, he's that guy that stands up and reads a quote to that woman. And then who's Ruth Davidson? Well, she's that woman that stands up and repeats what the first woman said in a slightly different way. And it's just the whole negativity of it is becoming something of a chore for me. That's my cringe on it. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, several people kind of feel a bit grim about the negativity. I'm a bit more sanguine about it, I suppose. I think a degree of negativity is probably all right, and I don't think that First Minister's Question Time is the great forum of the nation to resolve complex political trouble. But maybe actually, and I can ask you about something which occurred to me about Ruth Davidson. Now, she's in her early 30s, and she, the First Minister's questions for her is one of the few moments that she might get any airtime, whatever. And there's a couple of things which occur to me about Ruth Davidson. Firstly, despite being the only one of these opposition leaders with any claim to anything remotely approaching youth and verve, she's doing nothing with it. She might as well be one of the Blue Rinse Brigade as far as her public profile is concerned. And secondly, why does she keep on, instead of being nimble and having a second question prepared, why does she always, feel as if she's toddling after Lamont? I think it's really ineffective and just makes her look like sort of, Tweedledum and Tweedledee, and, the Tweedledee that everybody forgets is what strikes me as the kind of Ruth Davidson's character that she's.
It's also bizarre. Sorry, for 1 second, but it's also bizarre the kind of adversarial relationship with London and with Labour and Tory in London, and then this kind of working together thing in Edinburgh.
Yeah, Ian, I don't know.
I think all of that though is a bit of a feature of. I've said for some time that it's all very well if you have a yes campaign and a no campaign, then almost inevitably the no campaign is negative. I mean that it's difficult to be positive about a no vote. And people forget that is the context in which this debate is taking place. I think Ruth Davidson is an odd figure in terms of she kind of sums up the position of the Conservative Party in Scotland. If there was any conceivable circumstance in which the Conservative Party might be asked to provide the First Minister, Ruth Davidson would not be the leader of the Conservative Party. I don't know. I mean that if you think about that, quite seriously, in an odd sort of way, right? I don't say this particularly to blow the trumpet of Murdo Fraser, but when you see Murdo Fraser, you can just about imagine him as a kind of, Michael Forsythian, confident Tory figure who might have sufficient authority in some kind of bizarre electoral circumstance to be the leader of a coalition administration. You can't conceive of Ruth Davidson as the First Minister, and the Tories elected her really knowing that she was never going to be ever in the running to be the First Minister. The extent to which she's become a kind of mini-me, I don't know. I just think it kind of sums up the dilemma of the Scottish Conservative Party at the moment, and I don't know really exactly what the solution is to that. That's beyond. Well, even if I did know the solution, I wouldn't give it to them anyway. But I don't really have a lot of ideas to how they can turn things around. I don't think that if Murdo had won on his kind of independent Scottish Conservative Party Devo Max platform, I don't think the Tories would be doing any better than they are just now. The Tories have got a strategic problem in Scotland.
Maybe just to go way back to something that you noted right at the beginning there, Ian, about Nicola Sturgeon and her sort of evolving public character and her evolving public roles. And it's something which loads of people have commented upon in terms of making, sort of firefighting speeches, you might well say, in the wake of a kind of scandal. But also, her speech the other week that we were chatting about in the podcast last weekend, kind of articulating a vision of independence, which was, actually quite a lot of coverage and traction. I wondered, since we've got you on, what do you think about the kind of evolving public character of Nicola Sturgeon, a woman who's quite often, said by Labour figures that she ought to be in your party rather than in the SNP?
I mean, I'm a great admirer of Nicola Sturgeon. I've always been a great admirer of Nicola Sturgeon. I think the problem that she will have is, I hesitate to say if there was a yes vote, because I consistently have said I don't think there's any prospect of that, but if hypothetically there was a yes vote, then she would become Salmond, in all senses, Salmond's natural successor. I'm not absolutely persuaded just because of the internal politics of the SNP that if Salmond went under the proverbial bus tomorrow, that she would become automatically leader of the SNP. But if you consider the circumstances, if there's a no vote, one of the criticisms that I have of Joanne is that having been the deputy leader of a